The world's biggest annual political gathering has come to an end in Beijing. The Chinese Premier Li Keqiang met the press following the conclusion of the week-long Two Sessions event. The country's premier has been talking to international journalists. CGTN's Tui Huiyao reports.
2021 marks the beginning of a new 5-year development plan for the country. Lawmakers also gave the go-ahead for the details of the 14th 5-year plan and long-term development goals by 2035. The NPC also approved the government work report, which set China's GDP growth target at about 6% this year. Premier Li said the target took into consideration of global uncertainties while allowing possibilities of a robust recovery.
We must avoid wide swings in economic performance because that will disrupt market expectations. Growth that is too fast will not be steady. A steady pace is needed for sustained development. So what we hope for such a big economy as China's is sustained and sound long-term growth.
On China-U.S. relations, Premier Li said that disagreements and differences are unavoidable, but the two countries share common interests. He said both sides should respect each other's core interests and major concerns and focus on cooperation rather than confrontation. Experts say this year's Two Sessions carries extra weight because through the 14th 5-year plan, it is setting the tone for the country's next stage of development. Cui Huiyao, CGTN, at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing.
Bert Hoffman is the former country director for China at the World Bank. I asked him what the world should take away from the Two Sessions.
China shifting gear from crisis management to development. Last year was clearly a year to fight the COVID crisis, and China's done really well. That's why they came out with positive growth. But this year, the emphasis is more on the longer term, especially with the presentation of the 14th 5-year plan, which is going to lay out the development for the next 5 years and even for the next 15 years.
So what does that all mean in terms of investment opportunity, internationally and at home?
Well, the main strategy for China for the medium term is the dual circulation strategy. And that's a big word, but breaking it down, it means relying more on domestic demand, specifically consumption demand, relying more on domestic supply chains, and relying more on domestic innovation. So 3 prongs in that strategy. The consumer demand is probably a very important one for investors to look at. They say, well, you can benefit from China's growth if you focus on that consumer demand. But also, you can benefit from China if you know how to invest in the critical supply chains within China. So as foreign direct investor in China, you have opportunities to be present in China as well.
A lot of opportunity then for foreign investors. Are there any particular companies that you think are going to seize that opportunity?
Well, I think the Europeans are quite keen. The Europeans do a lot of production in China, and with the comprehensive agreement on investment, they believe that they have a bit more freedom. There's already a lot of companies that are present, and car companies and chemical companies are probably going to do quite well.
Let's talk about China's growth, because the Premier Li Keqiang, he defended China's modest growth targets, if you like. What's your take on the pace of recovery?
Well, look, I think China's well on track. The target as announced for this year is 6% or more. That's to some extent modest, because if China stops growing now, if it just keeps the level of GDP that it had at the end of last year, it would already reap 6% growth. So in that sense, it is, if you want, it's a bottom. Premier Li Keqiang says, look, we shouldn't aim too high because it will tie us down too much. And we need the flexibility. There's still lots of uncertainties out there. COVID is not over in the rest of the world, so we don't know exactly about domestic demand. And of course, there's also geopolitical tensions with the US. Next week, a big meeting to see whether those tensions will come down. But the first signs of the Biden administration are that some of those will remain. And therefore, there's a lot of uncertainty. And being a bit conservative is not a bad thing.
China's legislature has approved a resolution to make sweeping changes to Hong Kong's electoral system. The move will give Beijing loyalists, or patriots as they're called, those considered to have the best interests of the city at heart, a stronger voice. It'll see the election committee, which is responsible for nominating candidates and electing the chief executive, expanded from 1,200 members to 1,500. The Legislative Council is also being boosted from 70 members to 90. And a candidate qualification review committee will be established to vet candidates for election to Hong Kong's parliament.
The Chinese Premier says the decision to change the electoral system of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region will help ensure long-term stability and development in the city.
The purpose of the decision is clear. It is to adhere to and improve the systemic structure of one country, two systems, uphold the principle of patriots administering Hong Kong, and ensure steady implementation of one country, two systems.